A unanimous ruling and a heavy blow for the British Prime Minister. Boris Johnson says he respects the UK Supreme Court's decision that his suspension of Parliament was unlawful, but he disagrees with it. Speaking in New York shortly after the judgment, he attacked the anti-Brexit campaigner who brought the case against the government.
I have to say I strongly disagree with what the justices have found. I don't think that it's right, but we will go ahead and, of course, Parliament will come back. But I think the most important thing is we get on and deliver Brexit on October the 31st. And there's clearly the claimants in this case are determined to try to frustrate that and to stop that.
Mr. Johnson has claimed the decision to suspend Parliament was simply to allow the government to move on with its policy agenda. The UK's highest court saw it as a political strategy to outmaneuver Parliament weeks before the October 31st Brexit deadline.
The court is bound to conclude, therefore, that the decision to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament was unlawful because it had the effect of frustrating or preventing the ability of Parliament to carry out its constitutional functions without reasonable justification. The prorogation was also void and of no effect. Parliament has not been prorogued. This is the unanimous judgment of all 11 justices. It is for Parliament, and in particular the Speaker and the Lord Speaker, to decide what to do next.
Opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn, attending his party's annual conference, joined in calls for Boris Johnson to step down as Prime Minister.
I invite Boris Johnson, in the historic words, to consider his position. Obey the law, take no deal off the table, and have an election to elect a government that respects democracy, that respects the rule of law, and brings power back to the people.
The Supreme Court indicated Parliament's Speaker could call MPs back to Westminster. John Bercow duly complied.
In the light of that explicit judgment, I have instructed the House authorities to prepare, not for the recall, the prorogation was unlawful and is void, to prepare for the resumption of the business of the House of Commons.
All over the UK, MPs will now be making hurried arrangements to return to the House of Commons, where the Prime Minister and his colleagues will be keenly awaited. Jeremy East, Euronews.
Well, for all the latest, we're joined from London by Euronews' political editor Darren McCaffrey. Darren, morning to you. So, as we just heard there, Parliament resumes today. Are MPs just going to pick up where they left off?
In many ways they are. They are currently in cars, on planes and trains, trying to get down here to Westminster for when Parliament reconvenes at 11:30 a.m. local time. In saying that, looking at the order paper, there really isn't very much planned today, but that is not really what's going to happen in reality. I suspect at some stage we're going to have to hear from the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. He's going to have to come and give a speech in front of those MPs, but there will also be urgent questions of people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, the man who went up to see the Queen in Scotland to ask for the proroguing of Parliament. He's the leader of the House of Commons. Then other people, potentially like the Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, may be called to Parliament to explain why he advised the Prime Minister that the decision to suspend Parliament was legal. So it's going to be yet again another extraordinary day in this Brexit process, and in many ways also the newspapers here in the UK reflect the smorgasbord of views there are, Rosie, when it comes to Brexit and indeed this decision by the Supreme Court. First of all, if we look at the Times of London newspaper, it talks about how the Prime Minister flew back to Britain overnight, saying that Boris Johnson had to call the Queen up as he heads to the Commons, having to cut that trip to the United States short. Then the Daily Mirror newspaper talks about how there's a special place in history waiting for you, Prime Minister, suggesting that Boris Johnson may become the shortest serving ever British Prime Minister. He is on 63 days so far, the record held by a man called George Canning on 119. And then the Daily Mail, which has been a bit more sympathetic, I think, to the Conservative Prime Minister, saying Boris blasts who runs Britain, suggesting that this may be a constitutional coup and that MPs will return today, but they won't give us an election. Dream on. And that is the point, that as sensational as today could be, you would have thought in any normal circumstances there may well be attempts either to oust the Prime Minister or that he may resign. It looks like at the moment, in these extraordinary Brexit times, neither of those things will happen at all.
Well, you mentioned Brexit, and the clock is ticking. 5 weeks away, that deadline looms. What does this mean actually for developments in terms of politically getting Brexit underway?
Well, you know what? In many ways, it may not have actually a significant impact, and yet it might do. I say it may not because in many ways the fundamentals of Brexit haven't changed. It does not look like we're going to have an election this side of October 31st. It does not look like the opposition are going to try and remove the government. And so in those circumstances, Boris Johnson is still going to have to try and seek a deal with Brussels. In New York yesterday, he met with everyone from Angela Merkel to Emmanuel Macron, to the Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, and of course Donald Tusk as well. The task to still try and come up with alternatives on this issue of the Irish backstop. But be in no doubt that that task is still ongoing. We've got that summit next month on the 17th and 18th of October in Brussels. The question, of course, is, can he reach a deal in time? And I think the big impact on Brexit, if there's no significant domestic kind of changes here in Westminster in the coming weeks, is, and are Brussels convinced that a Prime Minister who is under so much political pressure, could he, even if he gets a deal in Brussels, can he deliver it in this place? Can he get MPs to vote for it?
Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, live in London. Thank you.